Thank you. Yogena chittasya padena vacham balam sharirasya cha vaidyagena yopakurutam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. In the last session, we discussed the second sutra of Vibhudipada, Tatra Pratyaya Ekadanada Dhyanam. That is the sutra we discussed. I mean, if our mind flows continuously in one direction without any effort, so total effortlessness, continuity and natural spontaneous flow of concentration in one direction on one object, it is called dhyana. As I mentioned earlier, dhyanam, or we call meditation, dhyana is the result of being fully established in dharana, which is concentration on one object. And when this dharana is genuine, when it is deeply established, it stretches itself to dhyana. So, in fact, there is not a dividing line in real practice. But this stretching out, spreading dharana to dhyana, that is from 6th to 7th state, is possible only if a spiritual seeker is fully established in the earlier 5 stages of discipline. That is yama, niyama, asana, pranayama and pratyahara. I explained this earlier. Yamas and niyamas are fundamental ethical moral disciplines. On the one hand, they are concepts. On the other hand, they are closely linked to our life, our actions, our thoughts, our deeds, our belief, our emotions, all. So, what happens to a person who is fully established in yamas and niyamas? The doors opening to negative channels are completely closed. Through the practice of non-violence, violent tendencies are completely closed. You transcend violent tendencies. Any tendency of violence in word, deed or thought will be completely eradicated. Through the practice of satya, the tendency to do something false or to speak something that is not true, all these tendencies are gone. And through the practice of asteya and aparigraha, you get total freedom from greed. So you can't even think of getting something that's not yours, or a tendency to possess things even when we are not in need of them. You're completely gone. So that means all the channels opening to negative directions are completely closed. And then when we practice asana, pranayama and pratyahara, these 3 disciplines, generate tremendous energy resources. Even physical energy will increase when a person practices many of the yogasanas, of course, and also that many of the practitioners of yogasana can easily relate this. And even pranayama, especially the retention within and retention without, antakumbhaka and bahikumbhaka. When you retain the breath inside or outside, that act produces tremendous energy resources. Now, what will you do with this energy? Suppose a very violent, greedy person practices a lot of yoga, asana, all this. His naturally violent tendencies will become more violent. His greed will increase. And whatever tendencies he already has with him will increase. If there are negative tendencies, they will be a problem for him and a problem for others also. But then, of course, real pratyahara is not possible without yamas and niyamas. But asana and pranayama, especially the external practices of asana and pranayama, are possible physically even without being established in yamas and niyamas. Of course, the result will be disastrous. Flight of ideas, extreme excitement, manic excitement can be a result of misguided, misdirected practices of pranayama. Very dangerous. Sometimes delusional problems, false thoughts and ideas will emerge in the mind, delusions of grandeur could happen. Suddenly you may think you are a grip of prophet syndrome we call in psychiatry. So all these things have really happened. So, and again, you will be cut off from world of realities. Now, not that this happens to everyone, but these are possible. Plus, of course, wrong and misdirected pranayama practices can cause asthmatic problems also. But again, remember, these are all things that happened only when a person does asanas and pranayamas for a very long time and without any guidance, without any direction, then only these problems can happen. Even those who practice yogasanas, simple yogasanas for exercise, even if they don't have a teacher, it may not do much harm. Simple postures. Also, simple pranayamas also need not necessarily cause harm. This is part of our regular puja worship, very simple. These things do not cause problems, but the problem is it increases energy, and energy will make you more enthusiastic. It can prompt you to increase the length of practice, and that can eventually land in trouble. That's how it happens. Now, in the next sutra, of course, we'll come back to this sutra, second sutra again, tatra pratyaya ekatanada dhyanam, which we discuss again. The third one is tat eva arthamasa nirbhasam. Arthamatra nirbhasam surupa shunyam iva samadhi. That means, yeah. Tat eva arthamatra nirbhasam. The same, that is tadeva, the same dhyana already mentioned in the second sutra. The same dhyana, when it illuminates the objects alone, and when it is totally devoid of its own nature, is called samadhi. So now, you can, of course, there is a very well-known explanation of this from the commentator, that is Vijnana Bhikshu in the Yoga Bhashya Vartikam, which is a very well-known part which is frequently quoted. That part is Dheya Swarupa Avesha Ahamidam Chindayami Ityayam Pratyaya Akara Vritti Antaran Udaya Tada Dhyanameva Samadhi Uchyade Ityarthaha. Now this is samadhi as understood in Patanjali yoga tradition. There are, of course, other important scriptures within Hinduism which explain samadhi differently. there are Vedantic interpretations of samadhi. As I mentioned earlier, and this is very important to remember, according to Shankaracharya and Advaita tradition, Ashtanga Yoga are very important, very significant for every spiritual seeker. But the samadhi reached, that the eighth limb in Ashtanga Yoga, is not the same samadhi that's mentioned in the Vedantic scriptures. It is closer to the samadhi ideal found in the tantric tradition. These, the meditation, different chakras, which are closer to Patanjali's view. So Advaita, Vedantic tradition, doesn't accept this samadhi as the ultimate liberation or moksha. But these 8 disciplines will take you to a state of mental preparedness, which is called sattva suddhi or chitta suddhi. You reach a level of mental purity, and from there you automatically will get the knowledge of Atman, and that leads to moksha or liberation. In other words, this will make you fit for higher realization, but it itself is not the highest state. And Vijnana Bhikshu was a great commentator, one of the most well-known commentators after Vyasa. So according to him, when this meditation or dhyana itself matures into samadhi, then it is overcome by the object of meditation. And then you reach a state which transcends cognition in the form I am meditating. And on the other hand, in other words, when you reach samadhi, you don't feel that you are meditating, you are the meditator, and you are something meditating. There is something on which you meditate, and you are engaged in this act of meditation. It's called Tripudi, Dhyata, Dhyanam, Dhyeya. Means the meditator, the act of meditation, and the object of meditation. So you transcend these 3 when you become one with what you are meditating upon. That is the ultimate state. So, as a meditation or dhyana becomes deep, more and more deep, the idea that, well, I'm meditating, it disappears. Only that reality itself will shine in your system. This, of course, to drive home this idea, I want to refer to the well-known book Yoga Yajnavalkyam. It is called Yoga Yajnavalkyam. It doesn't follow Patanjali system completely, but it's very important because there are very important descriptions of postures in this particular text, Yoga Yajnavalkyam, and it's supposed to be much older than Patanjali's Yoga Sutras themselves. And it gives a definition to especially the 6th and 7th, 8th and 8th stages of Ashtanga Yoga. That is dharana, dhyanam and samadhi, which are together called samyama, that we are going to discuss in the coming sutras. So samadhi is defined by Yajnavalkya. Samadhi samadavastha jivatma paramatmanohu brahmanyeva sthitir ya sa samadhi pratyagatmanaha. This is a well-known definition. So we should know what samadhi means in the Patanjali system according to yoga tradition, and what samadhi implies in the mainstream Vedanta system. It's very important to understand this distinction. So when you read Vivekananda's complete works, Jnana Yoga lectures especially, or when you read books on Dvaita philosophy, we must remember samadhi mentioned in the Jnana Yoga tradition, samadhi mentioned in the Vedantic tradition is the state of total and complete liberation, moksha. If you want to relate and compare it to something, you can perhaps compare it to nirvana, let us say. Nirvana state of Buddha. That is liberation. I mean, you come out of these cyclic, these transmigratory cycles. That is birth, life, death, and rebirth. You become totally free. This is what Buddha actually elaborately described in his own Ashtanga Yoga. Samyak Vak, Samyak Ajiva, Samyak Sankalpa, and so on, which are, of course, given discussion on the subject in Sunday lectures. You can listen to them. So here what it means is, in the Yoga Yajnavalkya, what it means is, this samadhi is the state of union, total identity between the individual jiva and the Supreme Brahman. And you reach that state and be established there. So and then you realize that it is not a state that you attain, rather it is a state that is already yours. You only discover. You only discover your own true nature. You don't attain it, you don't obtain it. Because anything that is obtained through this Ashtanga Yoga cannot be permanent. And that is an important point, remember, whenever we try to compare yoga tradition, Vedanta tradition, we should remember this. Anything that is the result of any ritual, any discipline, any practice cannot be permanent. The ultimate liberation, the realization that your Brahman is actually a discovery of something that was somehow obscured from you. That's the idea behind. Now, another important thing, just a brief analysis of these three states. One is, let us see what is ordinary concentration and what is dharana. Ordinary concentration, what we normally when we concentrate on something in which we are interested, a book, an art, a literature, or any activity. Now it's clear, thank you. So I just want to give an idea of what this is all about. First, I want to mention the 6th, 7th and 8th stages of disciplines. That is, dharana, dhyana and samadhi are interrelated. Dharana is deep-rooted concentration as a discipline. Dhyanam is the state where you reach when this dharana stretches itself. The concentration becomes deeper, goes deeper. And samadhi is the state where when you transcend even the awareness that you are concentrating, you are meditating. It's a simple matter. Now, let's say from the common man's perspective, what are actually these three stages? Let us first think of ordinary concentration. Without yamas and niyamas, say somebody who's interested in football, music, maybe some movies or whatever it is. That kind of absorption in a book or even in daydreaming, people sitting alone can get absorbed in some imagination, thinking about the past or even worrying about what could happen in future. So these are different examples of concentration. And this concentration also is effortless. Of course, in popular language, sometimes we think, I meditated upon something. Of course, it's good to feel that way, but in the technical language of Patanjali, it's not meditation, it is not even dharana. But it is not a state of spontaneity. Because even there you are not the master of your senses. When the focus of your attention it changes and changes into something that you are not interested in, then immediately there is a disturbance. So that's what happens in ordinary concentration. A yogi can drive his mind into whatever object he wants, and he, through dharana and dhyana, if you practice these two disciplines, that is sixth and seventh, the yoga practitioner can capture the whole idea of whatever he wants to learn or whatever he wants to concentrate upon in their multi-dimensional aspects. But ordinary concentration cannot achieve that. There, your senses are driving your mind into something because you are interested in it. That is ordinary concentration. But in dharana, what happens is, in dharana there is an amount of effort that you concentrate upon something as a discipline. But you do this after going through a number of previous disciplines. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. When a person attains pratyahara state, when he is able to take your mind and senses away from all external objects, then what happens? He is able to practice dharana. So there is not complete, there is a partial mastery that you are enjoying when you practice dharana. And that is possible because you have already attained pratyahara, the ability to take the focus of the mind away from external objects, and you have already learned how to focus your mind on something with the solid purpose of learning it, mastering it. That's why it is said, if you read Vivekananda's Swami Vivekananda's life, you find he could learn things very fast, and whatever he studied, he never forgot. And not that he was particularly interested in those things, but he had complete mastery over himself. That kind of concentration is possible only when you have practiced yama, niyama, asana, pranayama and pratyahara. Then only it is possible. Now a scientist who is a born scientist, the great discoverers and inventors, great musicians, great artists, painters, you find many geniuses. The whole lifetime they could do that. Ramanujam, the super genius in mathematics. But Ramanujam was not necessarily a yogi, because his whole focus was mathematics. We don't know if Ramanujam could have mastered other sciences, other branches of learning, if he wanted. But a yogi can do that with perfect mastery. You can find many geniuses, but in their life they attained a tremendous level of concentration, the power of concentration. But there was no self-mastery in it. A tremendous power of concentration with self-mastery is dharana and dhyana. I'll lead to dharana and dhyana. That's an important thing to remember. So, in dhyana what happens is, the act of meditation, that is the awareness that I am meditating, that's this awareness, and then the feeling, the awareness, the consciousness that I am the meditator, and then the awareness of the existence of the object on which I am meditating. All these remain within the field of consciousness in dhyana. But there also you are approaching complete self-mastery. And self-mastery because you are already done yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, and pratyahara. Remember, a great musician, a great painter, a great architect, or maybe a man like great mathematician like Ramanujam, for his whole life, he was mind-boggling what he knew about mathematics, what he could do in the realm of mathematics. But that's true of many great geniuses. Maybe Mozart or Beethoven or the great painters, Michelangelo or maybe Da Vinci. There were many great super geniuses in many areas. They had this inborn interest, and when they were doing that work, they were completely absorbed, they were lost to the world, they were existing only in the realm of music or whatever they were doing. That quality of meditative concentration is really dharana, but it is not dharana according to Patanjali, because dharana as understood in Patanjali's system implies total mastery of your mind and senses plus a tremendous power of concentration. Now, what is samadhi? Now, ordinary concentration, like getting absorbed in a book or maybe daydreaming, as I mentioned earlier, it also brings in an element of effortlessness and joy and serenity. But again, it is only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is misery, because the moment you lose that object of concentration or the object of your interest, you feel misery. Now, in samadhi, on the other hand, is state of spontaneity, which is a result of total freedom from senses. So in samadhi, you reach that power of dharana, dhyanam and samadhi. These three are interrelated. Together they are called samyama, which we are going to discuss. So there is this effortlessness, spontaneity, and total self-mastery and freedom from the senses in samadhi. And again, samadhi is fully conscious state of intense awareness in which the higher self replaces the ego consciousness. I mean, you are not aware of your own entity as an independent ego. On the other hand, from a spiritual perspective, the absorption of a person in music, art or literature, because he is greatly interested in those areas, that is a state of that is a kind of unconscious state. Let us say a child is watching football, or a painter is doing his painting, again a musician is composing. You find that everything else becomes immaterial, totally irrelevant to him. Why? Because at that state, there is effortlessness, there is tremendous concentration, but at the same time, there is not the awareness. He is not aware of his true spiritual identity. So, there is no self-mastery. So, it is an unconscious state. Another very important thing, samadhi is transform me to you. Samadhi completely changes the person. Why? Because when you practice yamas and niyamas, you become a different person. Naturally. When you practice non-violence, truthfulness, non-possessiveness, and then purity of life, maybe total dedication to God in the ordinary monotheistic systems, inner purity, total contentment, and feeding your mind with good ideas, good thoughts, and so on. And then you practice asana and pranayamas, which actually awakens some of the nerves in the body-mind complex, which remain inactive until you start practicing pranayama and asanas, etc. And also it closes these yamas and niyamas. They completely close the doors opening to undesirable channels by completely changing the personality. And then you practice pratyahara, the ability to take the focus, mental focus, away from disturbing objects. And then dharana, and then meditation, dhyana, and samadhi. So when you reach that state, there is a total transformation. Now, one may very well ask this question. We can understand Patanjali Yoga Sutras and relate that, let us say, to Sri Ramakrishna or Vivekananda or Shankaracharya or Great Holy Mother, maybe Buddha. Now, how do you relate these disciplines to the great spiritual teachers outside the Hindu Vedantic tradition? Well, you think of Jesus Christ. Of course, I am not referring to the number of days when he practiced penance and he was tested by devil. I am not going to those aspects. I am not referring to them. But the words that came from Jesus and the way he lived and acted shows very clearly that he was fully establishing yamas and niyamas. That is true of many, or any great person. Maybe Confucius, who was outside the realm of yoga and Vedanta. It is true. So any spiritual seeker in any tradition, when he starts thinking of something higher, a sublime spiritual ideal, automatically, unconsciously, he is practicing those very disciplines that Patanjali calls yamas and niyamas and so. So they are so universal. So I shall try to sum up what I said till now. One point, ordinary concentration can lead you to great achievement, great accomplishment, art, literature, music and so on. But there is no self-mastery in the spiritual sense of the term. But because it is said, and it is very well said that, and of course in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and also in the commentators, also in so many places, especially, this Yoga Bhasha Vartigam is very extensive, and Vijnana Bhikshu takes ideas from all kinds of Puranic books and mythological books and stories and so on. It's very scientific. He is not asking you to believe in myths, but is taking the subtle, obviously psychologically very proven ideas from these vast literature, and he quotes them to substantiate the views of Patanjali and the commentaries by Vyasa. Now, that's why he said higher concentration is dangerous for a person without yamas and niyamas. Concentration on art, literature, all these are very, very, very great, very wonderful, absolutely glorious. But concentration itself is just a mechanism in the ordinary sense of the term. But same concentration, when accompanied by yamas and niyamas, the great disciplines, then it becomes a road that takes you the highest spiritual attainment. That's the essence of this idea behind. That's why it is often mentioned in the traditional commentaries that even for understanding the basic principles of higher spiritual philosophy and ideas, one needs some degree of familiarity with these disciplines like yamas and niyamas. Non-violence, purity, freedom from greed, contentment, all these are important virtues needed to prepare our mind, to make our mind ready for understanding intellectually the ideas of many of the holy scriptures. If a person is fully established in yamas and niyamas, he can understand Upanishads far better. He can understand the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita far better. He can understand the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, the parables of the Bible far better. Because just as you need some training and discipline to enter an engineering college, if you want to go to MIT, you have to go through the yamas and niyamas versions in engineering. You should have already studied, you should appear for a competitive examination to get admission to university. Without that, if you go to university, it's not, first of all, the university won't accept you, and even if they accept you, it will be of absolutely no use to you because you are not ready for it. So like that, when we practice these disciplines, then our mind acquires those qualities that make it ready for understanding higher spiritual ideas. Why I am mentioning this? Frequently when we read a lot of blogs, now the whole world has become a platform. People write why Buddha did so, why Christ talked like that. People ask this question. Well, you cannot ask this question to Einstein. You call Einstein, why did Einstein say so? You'll be put in a psychiatric asylum. If you go to university, you are sitting in a physics class, you ask a professor, why did Einstein talk like that? Why did Newton talk like that? You'll be immediately put in an asylum. But in Vedanta and philosophy, anyone can say anything that he needs. So that's why to study Einstein theory, to study any lessons in higher science or technology or engineering or mathematics, you need to go through the basic preliminary disciplines. To become a doctor, you should study, you should be ready to enter a medical college, a medical institution. You should have already gone through certain basic training, preparation. Then only you will be fit to begin your first lesson on medicine. Like that, spiritual philosophy also is like that. And what are the basic disciplines? One should practice certain moral, ethical values, freedom from non-violence, freedom from greed, freedom from possessive tendencies, some purity of life, contentment, and then constantly feeding our mind with good spiritual food. All these are disciplines necessary for us to become mentally ready to study holy scriptures in whatever religion or to whatever religion you may belong to. Or you may not belong to any religion. So if you listen to agnostics and atheists, they say, why did Christ talk like that? You try to practice a little meditation and prayer. You don't believe in God. Then you try to understand the teachings of Christ. You will understand better. So that's the idea behind. Now we will come to the next sutra. That is, of course, I discussed this already. We will come to fourth sutra is very important. Trayam ekatra samyama. Now, these three, dharana, dhyana and samadhi. Together, they constitute samyama. This is a continuous process with three stages. So, dharana stage number 1, dhyana stage number 2, samadhi stage number 3. Together, they constitute samyama. 6th, 7th, 8th stages. When a person reaches this state, then it's called samyama. Of course, then the next one is tajjayat praknyaloka. By mastering this samyama, one reaches a state. It's called praknyaloka. That is light of knowledge will emerge. Aloka means light. Praknya means knowledge. What is that praknya? Of course, the word itself has got many implications. Prakashena jnayaditi praknya. Prakashena jnanaditi praknya means you're understanding things properly, comprehensively, in all aspects, and also in its pristine purity. That is called praknya. It can only be defined as a state of mind where you are able to clearly connect with the truth underlying everything that you are trying to understand. Before and without attaining this praknya, our understanding may be comprehensive in an intellectual sense, in the ordinary sense of the term, but still we may perhaps lose many aspects of it. Because by this time a person has already reached chitta vritti nirodha. That is, all the vrittis have been transcended. And also all the kleshas, avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, egoity, and then ignorance, that's first one, then egoity, second one, extreme infatuation to things which we know to be really undesirable and bad for us, extreme hatred, totally irrational hatred for things, totally meaningless, we know, but mind is full of negative samskaras, so you hate certain things, an infatuation to things which are totally undesirable, and also fear. All these, it's called chittamalam, means impurities of the mind. So all these which constitute the impurities accumulated in the mental system, which activate negative samskaras, actually in a way this is what we normally call negativity. We often say, so what we call negativity is nothing but the invisible pull of negative samskaras. We want to do something wonderful, we know it's needed, it's important, we are ready to face the problems in accomplishing something, but still somehow mind is just not cooperating at the right moment. It may result in some kind of procrastination. A procrastination may be the right word to use when you are talking about a deadline, a task, and you have to write a thesis, and you have a deadline, and then you go on procrastinating. That's okay. But negativity, which is the result of the chittamalam, that technically speaking, literally dirt of the mind, that is ignorance, egoism, extreme likes and dislikes, extreme infatuation, and extreme obsession for certain things, irrational fear, all these which constitute negativity, that goes much deeper, because the deep-rooted samskaras create a wall and won't permit you to enter. So you want to do it, but somehow the other you, another you within, won't permit. Now all these are completely gone. When all this negativity is completely gone, then it's called Praknyayaha Alokaka. That is light of Praknya, light of knowledge. light of the self-awareness, self-mastery will dawn upon us. In another sutra in the Kaivalyapada, 4th chapter, Patanjali says that this light, this awareness is already present in all of us. And all the disciplines that we talked about till now, they constitute our effort to remove the obstacles that stand in the way of the manifestation of this light within. So, the sutra, in a graphic language, it says it's just like a farmer who is trying to irrigate a field. He just removes the soil on the way to cut a canal to bring water from the lake or river to the field. So that is the sutra. Of course, we'll discuss that later in the Kaivalyapada. So now we can have interaction. Most welcome. Yeah. Yeah. Most welcome.
Swamiji, when you started, you were talking about how Advaitic tradition does not accept yoga samadhi as ultimate liberation.
Yeah.
And then later, while talking about yoga samadhi, you said it is a state where the reality alone shines. Basically, the meditator, the meditated object, and the meditation become one.
Yeah.
How is that different from Advaitic Samadhi? I was under the impression that even in Advaitic Samadhi, that is what happens.
Yeah. You know, first of all, a yogi, after attaining this state, he is trying to actually rediscover, reconnect with the reality that he is the Purusha. Purusha in the yoga philosophy is the self-effulgent reality. So he wants to attain his identity with the self-effulgent reality, Purusha. But in yoga philosophy, there is another categorical, another important category. I mean, it's another permanent reality, and that is Prakriti. So yoga philosophy is essentially dualistic. So even when you reach that state of your identity with Purusha, which is Kaivalya, that is the 4th chapter we discuss, still you still have to accept the reality of something that is non-effulgent, that is Prakriti. This is an important thing. You know, coming to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, you know what happens. Once you reach this state of total identity with Atman or Brahman, then your earlier identity is now recognized to be non-different from this Atman. I can explain this with greater clarity in the light of the rope snake analogy, Rajasapa Bhranti. Well, let us say, according to yoga tradition, I'm trying to apply this analogy in the yoga tradition. You know, yoga tradition, you realize that when you bring light, you know the analogy. You're familiar with the analogy. I need not repeat, I believe. You know, there's a semi-dark room, there is not enough light, there's a rope lying on the floor, you mistake the rope for a snake or a stick or whatever it is. Now, when you bring light, immediately you realize that what you earlier mistook to be the snake is now recognized to be the rope. Now the snake idea will completely disappear from your mind. It is only an idea. You understand very well that there was really no snake, only rope. Snake was only snake idea. It's very crystal clear to you. You completely transcend your earlier awareness, your earlier notion that there was a snake. Now, If you employ Patanjali system in this analogy, then you have to admit that the snake also is there. It has not gone away. But you realize this is a rope. Well, it's totally ridiculous, to be very frank with you, to use this analogy in the context of Patanjali system. But to understand Patanjali system, which is essentially dualistic. Dualistic in the sense it accepts more than one reality. There are so many Purushas. Prakriti is one. So, duality means a system of philosophy. Dualistic philosophy means a system of philosophy which accepts more than one fundamental eternal category. In yoga system, in Sankhya system, you accept the reality of Purushas, all as many Purushas as Jivas, and also Prakriti you accept. So even when you realize your identity with the self-effulgent Purusha, still you understand the rest of the people are still in their state of Prakriti. So Prakriti is never transcended. The unreal is never transcended. The unreal is as real as the real in yoga system. On the other hand, in the Vedanta system, once you realize Brahman, then what you earlier misunderstood to be the real is not different from the absolute reality. The world which you mistook to be mithya or relative, unreal, before you reach the highest realization, is now realized to be non-distinct from Brahman. That's the idea behind. I mean, the so-called snake is actually only the rope. That is the Vedantic idea. In Patanjali system, there is a snake there is also a rope there. Snake idea never disappears. Of course, you cannot employ the Rajusapa Bhranti, the snake rope analogy in Patanjali system, but to clarify the point, I use this analogy comparison, that's all.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Yogi. You're next.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know a child who has great absorption power. Appears to me like dharana, dhyana. Especially when he looks at sceneries and paintings, he can remember that and reproduce a lot of details with his painting. His parents, he lacks development in other faculties like speech and social interaction. So they took him his parents took him to doctors, and they diagnosed him as autistic child and put him on medications, and then those medications destroyed his concentration also. How do we distinguish whether it's psychiatric disease or real concentration?
If the professional doctor diagnose this as autism, then the child may have certain congenitive, inborn incapacity to study certain things. So a person who has a tremendous power of concentration, he will not totally lack the ability to learn other things. Total incapacity to learn or do other things is naturally something to do with autism or whatever it is. But there are many children who are mentally handicapped but tremendous skills in certain areas, because the whole mental horizon is focused on that work. So sometimes they become very creative in that particular realm. Of course, it happens. So Patanjali's system of dharana, concentration or meditation, dhyana, you should always remember it is only in the context of a person who has practiced the earlier 5 disciplines. This should be understood. Of course, there are many individuals who are born with disability to practice dharana. So yoga system will tell you that that person may have practiced all these disciplines in his or her previous life cycle. So this is it's a problem that often we cannot relate in modern times into the 21st century. If you talk about rebirth and law of karma, it is something that we cannot easily relate, but Patanjali's system and yoga system will make sense only if we accept at least the probability of rebirth and the law, doctrine of karma. So that's the idea behind. If it is an ability of self-mastery and concentration, then that person must have practiced yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Because without contentment, you cannot have the ability to take your mind away from things that are harmful to you. Okay. Without saucha, bahya saucha and abhyantara saucha, inner purity and external purity, you won't be able to focus your mind on something sublime, something spiritual, something not related to our own self-centered interests. So, to be interested in something which is not self-centered, one should have practiced yamas and niyamas. To be interested, tremendously interested in doing things which is good for everyone, that person should have practiced asteya and aparigraha. That means not having any desire for things that belong to other people, and also total freedom from greed. These are fundamental disciplines to be practiced early. This is an important point to remember. So you can test. Of course, there are great geniuses. I mentioned, there are great geniuses who can achieve great things, and there is an effortlessness in their ability to concentrate on what they are interested in. Power of concentration. They achieve great things, but they may not be enjoying total freedom from their own senses. It happens.
Isn't Hastamalaka Shankaracharya's?
Yeah, it's a classic example. Classic example. Because Hastamalaka immediately connected with the great teachings of Shankaracharya. Hastamalaka means that the gooseberry in his own palm. So Shankaracharya immediately understood this person, his past. That's why in some of the commentaries, I think in Bhojagurti, many other places also it comes, those who reach the state of samyama, they will be able to understand their own past life cycles, and they will be able to understand the past life cycles of others as well. So it is said in the life of Shankaracharya that he could understand the previous life cycles of Astamalaga, that he already practiced a lot of spiritual disciplines. Yeah, that could also be the case with many saints who had sudden transformations. You can find in many traditions sudden transformation. You can find. Now, sudden transformation normally we interpret as some kind of repentance, but it doesn't come to everyone. It doesn't come to everyone. Saint Paul was a tormentor of early Christians, and he became a saint. Suddenly he realized. Now, the point is, this you can find many saints and sages in Hindu Vedantic tradition. You find in Christian tradition, Buddhist tradition, Jaina tradition. You can find the sudden transformation. That sudden transformation really can happen only. It can be even understood properly only if you keep in mind the probability of that person's experiences and spiritual disciplines in his or her previous life. This idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you already touched up the answer, but I'll ask my question anyways. So what I was about to ask is that since you touched on the Panch Kleshas, or impurity of the Chitta, should one try to do meditation or contemplation if they feel like they still they have like a impurity of chitta? Is there anything Yoga Sutra that whether they should continue doing the meditation even if they have the chitta shuddhi?
Sound is not very clear. Could you repeat and speak little slowly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was asking if since you touch upon the shuddhi of chitta,
Yeah. Yeah.
should one do meditation in that condition or should avoid meditation or japa?
No, one should not avoid japa. Prayer, japa, reading scriptures are really helpful. And along with that, when you try to do meditation, normally, of course, in the Patanjali system, we can call it dharana. What we normally do is dharana, because meditation is a higher state. So if somebody practices reading holy books, scriptures, and prayers are very helpful and totally free from any danger. Along with that, if you also practice concentration, it will be wonderful. We have to remember one important thing, and I want to repeat that again. In this yoga, when you take this Ashtanga yoga, one should not imagine that first I shall practice yamas and niyamas for some time, then I shall practice asanas, then after some years pranayama and so on. In actual practice, again depends upon one's own personality and his background. Now, when you actually practice yamas and niyamas, naturally you will develop a tendency to practice pratyahara, really speaking. So, see, pranayama and yoga and asana should be separated from this. They are somewhat, they're both physical and also mental, of course. They affect the mind and body both. But of course, asana here means sitting in a posture, so that you will be able to practice dharana. Of course, practicing pratyahara also, the steady posture, sukham sthiram asanam, the steady, effortless posture is very helpful. So, one should not imagine after one step, then second step, the third step, like that. Actually, when you practice yamas properly, niyamas will automatically be added to that. And along with that, you will be able to sit quiet in one posture for a long time, because you already attained santosha, contentment, and you already attained freedom from greed, because you have practiced aparigraha and asteya, and you have no violent tendencies. So emotions and feelings and attitudes all reach a level of serenity that you will be able to practice asana. Again, not hatha yoga. Asana here means the ability to sit steadily for a long time, sthiram sukhamasana. And at that state, pranayama is different. Pranayama should be practiced under a teacher, especially the formal pranayama, otherwise it would be risky. But pratyahara is possible. Naturally, when you practice yamas and niyamas, you will have a tendency to take your mind away from the fleeting world of visual, sensory, sensual objects. Your mind will be less and less dragged outside by your own senses. You find your own senses are getting more and more under your control. And when you reach that state, concentration, the ability to concentrate on something sublime automatically comes. All this can come automatically together. Depends upon the intensity and sincerity of a seeker. And there are some verses in the commentaries, if a person has got mumukshutvam, that is Vedantic discipline, sadhana sadhushtaya, a strong desire for spiritual enlightenment, for liberation of moksha, mumukshutvam, moksha. If you have got a strong desire to start to live a spiritual life, the strong desire itself will produce or will prepare your mind to practice yamas and niyamas and even dharana. So this is an important thing to remember. So all these come together. I give the example. It's not like somebody who doesn't know driving, he goes to driving school and he didn't know what it was like learning driving. He thought it's a very elaborate process, so he asked the driving instructor how to learn driving. So the driving instructor gave him, first you should open the door of the car, you should sit there, then switch on the engine, then there are a few steps one after another. But for an expert driver, it's a matter of maybe just a few seconds. This is true in spiritual life also. Depending upon the intensity, sincerity of the seeker, all these things come naturally. Except, of course, asana. I am not talking about hatha yoga. Even when our mind is not wavering, when it is contented, you will be able to sit quietly for a long time undisturbed. That is called asana in Patanjali's language. Sthira sukham asana. Sthiram sukham. You should be able to sit for a long time with total effortlessness, pleasant, in a happy mood. So that state of asana practice comes very easy for a person who practices, yamas and niyamas. Actually, the practices of yamas and niyamas, they create the fuel, the energy, and then your plane can take off. But it's not easy. For those who are not ready, it's not easy. For those ready, it becomes easy and natural. Yamas and niyamas.
Thank you, Arjun. I was just asking, my question was, if when your mind is restless due to this kleshas, should you do contemplation or should you avoid it?
Oh yeah, actually, okay. It's a simple focus question. Now it's clear. See, when a person is suffering from extreme restlessness, the raga, dvesha, they act like polar opposites. Even bipolar problems, raga, dvesha can come. Then one should not try to meditate at that stage. He should read some good books. You should listen to some good sublime music. Because there are the musical programs can actually make you more restless. I'm talking about there are wonderful music also. They can be helpful. You read good books, listen to good ideas, do something creative and constructive. That will actually reduce the restlessness. So if it is a pathological problem, then some kind of good physical activity is a starting point. One should not immediately start pranayama and all. One should not do that. One should try to do something creative, constructive, something protective, something that can somehow bring in some good spiritual food into our mental system. Reading good books is a wonderful way of starting spiritual life. Especially if a person is suffering from extreme restlessness, anxiety, worry, then reading some good books. Especially the life biographies of great persons who are examples of serenity, calmness, quietude. Then that's a way to undo the damage. Reduce the restlessness and anxiety. Thank you.
Hi, Swamiji.
Yeah.
You talked about other selves within us that come up and prevent us from doing what we want to do sometimes. My question is, how should we engage with these other selves and live with them in a peaceful way? And when these other selves come up, how do we discern who those other selves are versus who our real true self is?
Excuse me, you're talking about ourselves.
So you mentioned near the end of your talk about different voices that come up, or different selves in our mind, and that they are often the result of bad kleshas or things that we might have. And I'm curious to hear how we should engage with those other selves, those other voices that come up.
You're talking about negativity, I mean, unhelpful, unfriendly thoughts and ideas you're talking about.
Yeah, you talked about them as selves. I was curious as to why you used that word, and if that has other meaning beyond that.
Yeah, again, these kleshas and negative ideas, unhelpful ideas, disturbing ideas and thought currents, they are the expressions of certain samskaras, which are, samskaras mean tendencies, impressions, which are already accumulated in our mental system, and they are not helpful. When we try to meditate or pray, if our mind doesn't allow us to pray, it means in our mental system there are certain tendencies which are not conducive to spiritual disciplines like prayer. So we should produce certain positive tendencies, positive impressions in our mental system to increase the amount of positive tendencies. And that can be done, again as I mentioned, by reading good books, listening to good ideas, by prayer. Prayer is a great, psychologically also is a very great helpful tool. And you can listen to great ideas, read books and observe great ideas, because what we read, what we listen to, what we do, like prayer, will generate positive and helpful samskaras, impressions, and they will counteract negative samskaras, negative tendencies. And as our negative tendencies get weakened by the emergence of fresh positive samskaras, what happens is mind's resistance will slowly come down, and we'll be able to feel more enjoy, we'll be able to more serenity and peace when we try to do meditation. So it becomes easier and easier for us to practice spiritual disciplines as negative tendencies get weakened. The amount of negative tendencies become relatively less compared to these newly created positive spiritual tendencies. That's why when you practice karma yoga, when you do something creative and constructive, we feel actually a kind of contentment. We feel great joy when we listen to something good, when we do something really good. Oh, I have done something meaningful, relevant. If that activity is not a self-centered activity, but not a selfish activity, something noble, that activity immediately produces a positive asset tendency in our mind. We feel very happy. So this will increase, and as this happens, we'll have less problems, less difficulties in practicing spiritual disciplines. And simultaneously, these 5 kleshas, we call chitta malam, these 5 kleshas, they will slowly become weakened and they will disappear eventually.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maharaj, the question, so as the yogi progresses, at some point of time, he remembers his past lives.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would create more problem, right? Because it would, I mean, if currently we don't remember our past lives, but we have the tendency, and that is causing so much problem. Now, if you start remembering your past life, that would be even more turbulence in your mind, right?
You're absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. But this happened, the ability to understand one's own past lives, it comes only when you practice samyama. Samyama means dharana, dhyana and samadhi. By the time you reach that state, you'll be ready, your mind will be pure, totally free from all negative samskaras, and all devrittis will be transcended. At that time, you can connect with your past life cycles, past lives, still remain unaffected. On the other hand, if an ordinary person, if he ever comes to understand his past, it could be a terrifying experience for him. Actually, from a psychological point of view, if a person really understands that he has to go through a lot of difficulties in future, then he won't be able to face those difficulties. So very often, our inability to understand the past is a saving factor. That's why in one of the mattas smriti jnanam apohanam cha, you see in the Gita it says, the ability to remember smriti, jnana means to know, apohanam means forgetfulness. So the memory, knowledge and forgetfulness, these three are emerging from the Lord. It's God's gift to us actually, the ability to forget. But at the same time, a yogi is trying to take a reverse journey. He's actually trying to connect with his own pure self, his own true identity, Purusha, in the Patanjali system. So when you reach that state of dharana, dhyanam, you'll be totally free from any problems. At that time, even if you realize your past, you will not be affected. You can remain unaffected. That's why in Buddha Jataka tales, he tells all these stories to his disciples. Buddha was born as a quail, as an elephant, and so many different creatures. He was born a prince. So many life cycles he had. But Buddha had already reached the state where he could easily connect with his own past and remain totally unaffected. So remember, that's the idea. The ability to remember the past, according to Patanjali system, it comes only when you reach samyama. So what is samyama? Dharana, dhyana, samadhi. 6th, 7th and 8th stage. Together they constitute samyama. And at that time you will have attained complete self-mastery. No problem. It becomes a terrifying experience only when we are not ready for it. That's why forgetfulness is a gift from God, really speaking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sriram, your question.
Swamiji, earlier in one of the previous lectures you mentioned that distinction between dharana, dhyana and samadhi is a matter of duration. 12-second dharana, 12 times that, 2.5 minutes or roughly that time is dhyana and samadhi.
Yeah.
How does one progress from one stage to the other? You also mentioned that Triputī absence in samadhi is happening. Does it progression happen through practice and thereby everything becomes more effortless?
Yeah, you should know, in the sadhana pada towards the end, there is an important sutra, and that is that the sutra is Bahya Abhyantara Stambha Vritti Deshakala Sankhyabi Paridishta Dirgha Sukshma. Now remember, this is only in the context of pranayama. Remember, the sutra in the Sadhanapada 50th sutra is referring to pranayama. And also the beginning of dharana, one may be able to do dharana only for a short time, maybe 12 seconds, and then its multiples. But in actual practice, when you already attained pratyahara and fully established in pratyahara, then dharana becomes easy, and that dharana, when it deepens, then it stretches, it spreads, it extends to a longer period of dharana, and then it becomes further extends. And these are three stages: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Actually, the exact measuring in terms of seconds, it is only in a relative context. It is only in relative context. For those who have attained the highest level of dhyana, it may not be for seconds, it may be for much longer time. So in reality, there is no dividing line, because if you are already established in all the previous 5 disciplines, then dharana will automatically stretch itself to the next stage and dhyana. There is no doubt about it. You cannot say, actually, first I shall do dharana for 12 seconds, then 144. That is only very relative. It doesn't happen in mathematical calculation. If you calculate like that, you will have neither dharana nor dhyana, leave alone samadhi. If somebody goes to a prayer hall and I will meditate exactly for 35 minutes, and he is focused on that, he will not meditate even for 1 split second. Because, so you find it in the this Deshakala Sankhya that strictly relates only to pranayama, because that's important. Yeah. Even Desha also there, I mean the Sat Chakras, Sapta Chakras, all these are implied here. Which again, in the commentators you can find all the differences. And also there are very elaborate descriptions in Yoga Yajnavalkyam. Yoga Yajnavalkyam takes it to Vedantic perspective. So there are very elaborate descriptions of dharana, dhyana and samadhi. Different things. So thank you. So wonderful questions. There's a very important announcement for you. Next Sunday, that is April 18th, we don't have this class, Yoga Sutra. There will be no Yoga Sutra class next Sunday, because we have a important function for the congregation. So please remember, there will be no class next Sunday, that is April the 18th. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
The recording has stopped.
Hari Om.
Swamiji.
Yeah, namaskar.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, namaskar.